I want to know, this is a rhetorical question, did we all end up teaching world religion because of who we are, or who we are is partly because we all taught world religion? I mean, I didn't know that till, who brought that up? You brought that up. What an interesting insight. Although, see, I think you were up to it way early. You were too. I was late to the party. Okay. But how, I mean, it's just an interesting thing we have in common, in addition to our astrological signs. Which is what? Oh, let's talk about Enneagrams. Because I have no earthly idea. I know.
Four,
in
case you hadn't guessed.
5.
4. Well, I took the test and paid a lot of money and just kept coming up with triples. And then I finally said to Brian McLaren, because his wife does it, I said, just tell me. Please just tell me and save me the trouble. He said, I'm sorry, but I think you're a 4.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Exactly, I'm sorry.
Okay. I find it interesting we all taught world religions. So is there anything that you would like to ask each other or me right here in front of everyone? No, okay. Let's talk about, just let that one sit. That one I just looked at it and went, let's go back to inner spirituality, because when Rami and I did a thing at January Adventure, I was going in with the love of the world's religions, the holy envy, but I decided to write the book out of a place of being rooted in a tradition. And you've heard that talked about this weekend. But clearly I'm in the presence of two people who embody interspirituality. My problem is, how do you be this smart? How do you be this smart? How do you be this grounded in these traditions? Houston Smith had a flavor of that for me, because he gave so much time. Today, a minute ago, when Owen and Molly were talking about going on pilgrimage, but staying in the same place for 7 days, instead of hitting one hot spot. But there's a way in which each of you can embody inner spirituality in a way. I think I still embody a Christian who has terrific holy envy and kinship with people of every faith I've learned anything about. But let's talk about inner spirituality, and you brought it up. Tell me about that word.
And Houston Smith, I feel, was a lot like you. You wouldn't even necessarily know that he was deeply rooted in Christianity, but that was his home, and yet he was so incredibly not only open to other spiritual traditions, but knowledgeable. I think about Thomas Keating. You spoke today so movingly and fleetingly, Rami, about how we've lost some of our great beloved teachers all in this cluster over the last couple of years. And Reb Zalman, of course, was one of them, people who have specifically touched us and helped shape us. And Thomas Keating was another. And I think Thomas helped me keep brutally honest about my interspiritual proclivities, because Thomas would say, this is great. I mean, he was dedicated. Thomas Keating was dedicated to what now might be called, and what the term Wayne Teasdale, a Benedictine monk, called interspirituality. And Thomas was always challenging us to retain the rigor so that we weren't just being spiritual dilettantes. And partly that's a patriarchal message, as I mentioned in my talk. I think, like, don't be a dilettante, don't skim the surface. You have to pick a tradition and go deep, unless you're a very rare creature who can do it in another way. But and I learned a lot, and Thomas helped me strengthen my muscles and be robust. I think that's partly why I taught world religions, because it forced me to learn about them and not just skim the surface. And to teach, there's nothing like teaching to learn something, right? Everyone probably in this room knows how much you learn by teaching. But I have discovered that there are some of us whose nature it is to have our hearts fall open in the presence of the sacred in multiple spiritual landscapes. And that it is not the way that our temperament is to to identify with a particular religious tradition exclusively. But although I think that many of you who are rooted in a single tradition are not exclusive either. I mean, Cynthia Bourgeault says you can't help but be an interspiritual being if you deeply connect with your own spiritual tradition. It naturally opens your heart to the presence of the sacred everywhere. But that's just not the kind of creature I am. It's kind of like being polyamorous by nature, which I am not, honey, but I am spiritually. And so the way I've always described it is that I feel like I have this covenant with my beloved, who is beyond all form, beyond all gender, and is also deeply personal and intimate for me. And that the minute I experiment with identifying with a single spiritual tradition, including my ancestral Judaism, which I feel a deep connection to, or Hinduism, which I grew up with by virtue of my lifelong relationship with Ram Dass, as soon as I set my, what do you call it, set my thing, thank you, in a specific sacred space, I feel like I'm violating my covenant with my beloved.
Okay.
But the word gives me the heebie-jeebies. Why? I'll make it very brief. Because it's becoming a thing. It's becoming a new ism. Interspirituality. So now there's an interspiritual movement, and there are a bunch of white dudes who are kind of running the show, and it's, I'm just finding even though I'm considered to be a kind of pioneer of this movement, I'm distancing myself because it just feels like another institution.
So I would amen to all of that. Amen to white dudes, but they always try to run the show. I want to pick up on the Father Thomas thing. I love this guy. I wouldn't even say I loved this guy. I love this man. He's only dead in one dimension. I was with him shortly before. Everyone thought he was going to die, and at one period near the end, and I got there in time to be with him, and then he lingered on, and when I tried to see him again, the sisters who were taking care of him said, "No, you can't see him." He called me on the phone, and he said, "I'm really sorry you can't see me." And I said, "How are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I'm dying, but they won't take me seriously." But because he died in Massachusetts at Spencer Abbey, and I was visiting my mom, and I tried to get up to see him. But I went to see him at Snowmass at St. Joseph's Abbey, where he was, and we all thought he was dying then. And we met for about an hour, and we were just talking, and I was just telling him how much I loved him. And then at the end, it dawned on me that here's this amazing opportunity to find out how you die. So I said, because I wasn't with Zalman when that happened, so here was my chance, was Father Thomas. And I said, "So how are you living your dying?" And so I don't know if you can see this. He's in a wheelchair, wearing his cassock. But he's sitting in the wheelchair, and I've got the mic in one hand, so it's hard. But he puts his hands, he puts them together like a scoop, like he's going to lift up water. And he says, every time, he says, I'm dying the way I lived. And the way I lived was, every time Thomas comes up, let me stand up so you can see. Every time Thomas comes up, I let Thomas go. Every time Thomas comes up, I let Thomas go. And with that, he means every time the Catholic Thomas comes up, I let the Catholic Thomas go. Every time whatever narrative he had, he just lets the narrative go. And he does that a few times, and then he says, at one point, Thomas will come up, I will let Thomas go, and that's it. So then I said, but wait, you're a Catholic. There's more, Where do you go when you die? Where do you think you go? And he gives me this look like, you're so dumb. Thomas comes up, I let Thomas go, there is nowhere to go. You know, the wave returns to the ocean. It's just back into the source out of which, in which we live and move and have our being and our dying. And it was such a powerful experience to have him tell me that. And the next time I saw him, I was in Toronto at the Parliament of the World's Religions. I'm having dinner with friends, and we all get a text, and on our phones we open up the text, and it's just a full color close-up picture of Thomas in the coffin. Cynthia Bourgeot had sent it to us. No warning, no nothing. Oh, Cynthia, And it was, he was beautiful as in death as he was in life. Just amazing.
Let's gather that silence for a minute from both of your answers. So beautiful about very different things. But